Hello again, and welcome to our second online presentation regarding the improvements Public Works is proposing for Ayd Mill Road in 2020. I'm Paul Kurtz, Interim Director and City Engineer for the Department of Public Works, and I'm here today with Randy Newton, our City Traffic Engineer. I brought Randy in today because much of our focus for this presentation will be on the results of our traffic modeling and understanding where traffic diversion might occur if we reduce northbound Ayd Mill Road down to one lane. Randy will walk us through what the traffic modeling indicates. Once again, we were hoping to be able to deliver this presentation to the community in person, but the Minnesota Shelter-in-Place order to promote social distancing has us doing another online presentation. Our first Ayd Mill Road online presentation was a huge success in terms of the number of people we reached, as you will see during this presentation. Our hope is that this second online presentation will be just as successful, and we have no reason to believe it won't be. In recognition of that success, I do want to thank everyone who participated in viewing and responding to our first presentation that took place back on March 16th. We were overwhelmed with the number of responses we received, which speaks to just how important the Ayd Mill Road corridor is for so many people. During this presentation, we will be going over the answers that you provided to the questions we asked after the first presentation. We will also be summarizing the additional comments you provided. We learned a lot from your answers and your comments, and we appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts with us. If you are about to watch this presentation without having viewed the first presentation, I would encourage you to go back and watch the first presentation so you can better understand the background and history of Ayd Mill Road, as well as the detail behind the improvements being proposed by Public Works. This presentation will be posted for a while, so you can always come back to view it later at your convenience. So with that, now on to our second presentation. So here is our agenda for this presentation. I will take us through the purpose, the recap of our three-lane design recommendation, and summary of the feedback we received from the first presentation. I will then turn it over to Randy, who will take us through the traffic modeling and analysis work that was done. He will also be detailing for you the steps we might take to mitigate traffic concerns at particular locations as a result of reducing northbound Ayd Mill Road down to one lane. The last thing we will cover then is a look ahead to the next steps on how we get to making actual improvements to Ayd Mill Road in 2020. So the purpose of our presentation today is to summarize the survey results from our first presentation. I will be reviewing the questions we asked and the responses you provided, and then we'll take a look at other general comments that were made. Then we'll go over the traffic modeling and analysis that was performed. We will reveal impacts to Ayd Mill Road itself, impacts to adjacent roads, and then review mitigation strategies that we might take in dealing with particular locations and intersections outside of the Ayd Mill Road corridor. And then our final purpose will be to inform you of the final design recommendation that Public Works will be moving forward with to the City Council on April 22nd. I want to remind you of the design concept that Public Works presented to you during the first presentation. I also want to remind you that this was not the only option that we considered. We looked at 4 design options and thought this one made the most sense, not only from an economic standpoint, but also from providing multimodal facilities along the corridor. So again, here is some information about why we recommended the 3-lane design. The estimated cost for the project is $7.5 million. And one of the reasons we recommended it was because it was a lot less expensive than the 2-lane configuration. The other reasons, 2 southbound and 1 northbound lane. We didn't want to impact the southbound lanes because that is where all the off and on ramps are. And that would have been, we would have had to rework all of those, and that would have drove the cost up on the project. The 3-lane also offered us significant safety improvements, whereby we were able to keep the median in place between the southbound and northbound vehicles, and that of course then reduces the potential for head-on vehicle crashes. And lastly, the safety was prioritized for our pedestrians and bikes and vehicles at all access points. We were able to do that with the 3-lane design. The northbound lane access is maintained, and we'll see that in the next couple of slides, as is the trail access that was added at the ramp intersections, which we'll review in the next couple of slides. So here's a rendering of what the improvements might look like along Ayd Mill Road. And this is looking in the northbound direction, and the ramp or the bridge ahead is the Grand Avenue Bridge over Ayd Mill Road. So you can see the proposed improvements we are planning to make along the corridor. Off on the right, of course, is our trail, our multi-use trail for pedestrians and for bicyclists. We do have a small area of a median, I'll call it, between the trail and the roadway itself, kind of a boulevard area. We then have our curb section we would plan to put in, improving all of the drainage issues we have along Ayd Mill Road. Then we have our 1-lane northbound, heading in the northbound direction. We also have a median that will be installed or will be maintained in place. Not that it's grass everywhere. We may have concrete. For purposes of this rendering, though, we show it as grass. And then, of course, there will be the 2 southbound lanes that will remain pretty much untouched other than a mill and overlay. So here's the rendering. We get a little bit closer to the intersection of Grand at Ayd Mill. We heard 2 major themes or concerns with our proposed 3-lane design. The first was, how are you dealing with northbound left turn lanes? And the answer to that is that we are going to provide left turn lanes at the intersections of St. Clair, Grand, and Ashland, just as you see it here on the rendering for Grand. I think people were a little concerned that if we went down to 1 lane in the northbound direction and there was a left turner onto any of the ramps, that traffic would back up waiting for the left turners to clear. That will not be the case, as we are allowing some left turn storage at each of those ramp intersections. The only difference will be that today there is a dual left at the Ashland intersection, and that will be reduced to a single left turn lane under the new improvements. The second thing that concerned a lot of folks is, how are pedestrians and bicyclists getting down to the trail along Ayd Mill? The answer to that is that we are going to provide a trail access along the ramps themselves, coming down from St. Clair and Grand and Ashland. This will lead peds and bikers down to the signalized intersections, where they can then safely cross and get to the trail along the east side of the corridor. All of the pedestrians and bike crossings will be on the north side of the intersections, and they will be protected as they are crossing at signalized intersections. So I hope explaining these design features eases people's concerns about how Ayd Mill Road will operate, especially at the ramp locations. We have the left turners covered, as well as getting the pedestrians and bikes across Ayd Mill to the trail facilities safely. Another concern that we heard a lot about is the intersection or the ramps at Jefferson on the south end. So here is another rendering that shows the proposed improvements at the Jefferson ramps. Again, I think there was some confusion on how they might work. So the current northbound Ayd Mill on-ramp for westbound Jefferson traffic will be eliminated, and then that will be converted to a pedestrian and bicycle trail and tied directly into the trail along the east side of Ayd Mill Road. This means that westbound Jefferson traffic then will have to use the loop road ramp access in order to go northbound on Ayd Mill Road, just like the eastbound Jefferson traffic does today. So bicyclists using the Jefferson Avenue bike lanes will be able to directly access the new trail facility along Ayd Mill Road. So getting into a little bit of the summary of the feedback we heard from the first presentation, the overall numbers, we had 1,778 views of that presentation, and we had 1,138 responses to our survey. And in terms of people who responded, 88% of those we heard from live within the city of St. Paul, and 12% live from outside the city. We know that because we required each respondent to put in their zip code for us. So you can see a majority of the respondents, almost 3/4 of the respondents, came from those that live in the Summit University, McAllister Groveland, Highland Park, and Fort Road Federation. In those districts, almost 75% of the folks that responded to the survey came from that area, which we would probably see that as those areas directly affected by the corridor. So that's why we had a bigger response from those groups. But we did have a response from other areas of the city, as you can see on the attached map. So let's get into the questions we asked. We asked 5 questions on our survey, so I want to go over each one of those with you. The first question we asked was, please share why the city's investment in Ayd Mill Road is important to you. And you'll notice with all of these responses, these are approximate percentages. So that's why you see the wavy line before the percentages. But approximately 36% said they use Ayd Mill Road regularly, either as a commuter or as an access road to get from one point to another in St. Paul. So that's not surprising. That's why investment's important, is because people use it. 32% approximately support multimodal use of the Ayd Mill Road and would like a trail for people and bikes that connect to other infrastructure. 19% said Ayd Mill Road is an important vehicle connector for them, both to I-35E and I-94, and it helps reduce traffic on other streets. 14% said we should definitely improve the road condition. They're looking forward to that. And 13% live near the Ayd Mill Road corridor, and that's why they want to see it improved. And then another 10% said they live within St. Paul and they'd like to see it improved. The second question we asked is, complete this sentence for us. When it comes to Ayd Mill Road, I think it's important for the city to consider, and 30%, roughly 30%, said multimodal options for Ayd Mill Road were important and that we should consider them. 17% said the impact of reducing vehicle lanes of traffic on Ayd Mill Road and surrounding streets is something we should be considering. And we have, and we will show you that when Randy gets to the traffic modeling. 15% drivers, including commuters who currently use Ayd Mill Road, we should be considering them, and we have. 11% said we should consider repairing the roadway. We couldn't agree with that more. 10% cost to repair and change Ayd Mill Road, including future maintenance costs. And cost has certainly been a big driver for us all the way along here. And then 9% were in support of keeping 4 lanes of vehicle traffic. The third question we asked was, complete this sentence for us. When it comes to the 3-lane proposal for Ayd Mill Road, I like. 32% said they'd like the trail for pedestrians and bikes to be included as part of our improvements. 30% said they like nothing about the 3-lane proposal. They wanted us just to repair the road and keep the 4 lanes. 17% said safety features, including the barrier between northbound and southbound lanes and the separation of the trail from the vehicles, is something they really liked. 9% they liked the lower cost of the 3-lane proposal versus the 2-lane option. And then 7% thought this was a great compromise and that it serves all modes of transportation. So our fourth question, complete this sentence for us. When it comes to the 3-lane proposal for Ayd Mill Road, I am concerned about. 21% are concerned about increased traffic congestion on Ayd Mill Road, especially if we drop the northbound direction down to 1 lane. They're also concerned about increased traffic on area streets. 13% are concerned about spending money on Ayd Mill Road versus other streets or city priorities. 21% are concerned about safety, including the speed of traffic, space barriers between the trail and the vehicles. And then 7% access to the trail in northbound lane were a concern for folks, and how and where people will enter and exit the trail in the northbound lane. And we showed that back on the slide, the rendering at the grand ramp to Ayd Mill Road. We showed how that access will be accommodated for all three ramp locations, St. Clair, Grand, and up at Ashland. And finally, we asked my questions about the three-lane proposal for our Ayd Mill Road are, and these are what people responded. They want to know, how will the proposed plan affect neighborhood traffic? And we'll hear that shortly when Randy gets to his part of the presentation. What are the specific on and off vehicle, bike, pedestrian facilities, especially at Selby? So we showed you at Jefferson how the bikes will get on to the ped bike trail. We showed you at Grand how they'll get on. That will be the case at St. Clair as well as at Ashland. What we didn't show is up at Selby, and that's because there are no pedestrian or bike facilities up, I should say bike facilities up on Selby. We recognize that when bicyclists get to the north end at Selby, we're going to kind of drop them off and they're going to be on their own. That's all part of building out a bicycle network. We can't do it all at once. We recognize we have to do it in pieces and parts. And this is the opportunity where we can get 1.5 miles of multi-use trail along the Ayd Mill corridor, and we want to take advantage of being able to do that now, recognizing that it isn't always connected to other things at this point. That will have to be considered in the future. Other things people were questioning is, why is there not a direct link to I-94? Why wasn't the original plan for the I-35E to I-94 route implemented? And then you look at the next question, why wasn't this road maintained, redone a long time ago? The answers to that we kind of covered in the first presentation. There's really two answers to it. One is people couldn't agree. We couldn't reach a consensus on what the right thing to do was as far as connecting to the north end. And then, of course, there's a huge cost to connecting Ayd Mill Road on the north end. What are the long-term maintenance costs of this proposal? Can maintenance costs be reduced? Maintenance costs will be reduced if we make these improvements. We won't have all the potholing that we have going on out there today. The roadway will be in really good shape, and we would anticipate there will be minimal to no maintenance costs associated with the road in terms of keeping up with the roadway condition. Will speed limits be reduced? That's something we still are considering. The speed limit is currently 45 miles per hour out on Ayd Mill Road today. We wouldn't anticipate it will increase. It may stay the same, and it may likely even be reduced a bit, but we haven't gotten to that yet. We will do that as we get into the final design stage of the project and be able to implement whatever the speed limit we come up with when the project is finally constructed. How long will the mill and overlay last? Should a complete rebuild be done? We think with the improvements we're going to make to the drainage situation that exists along the corridor, that our mill and overlay will last a heck of a lot longer than it would if we didn't make those drainage improvements. So, and a complete rebuild, of course, would be a lot more expensive than what we're proposing to do with the three-lane section today. What park pedestrian beautification facilities will be added? Will solar wind be used for lighting? No, solar wind will not be used for lighting. That will be hooked up according to how we do our lighting today throughout the city. And as far as park and pedestrian beautification facilities, we are not anticipating adding anything to the project for this phase of the project anyhow. We want to keep our costs down as much as we can, but of course with all future pedestrian beautification, landscaping, all of that, that can certainly be added at a later date. And why can't this just be turned back to nature? I think about our first presentation and the fact that we've got 27,500 vehicles on an average day on the south end of the facility. If this were not a roadway, the question would be, where are all 2,700 or 27,500 vehicles? Where would they all go? So It's a pretty significant roadway in terms of the traffic it carries, so we think it's important that it remain in place. So last thing we said, is there anything else you would like to share about Ayd Mill Road? And I'll just quickly go over these. People suggested we should close Ayd Mill Road to all motorized vehicles. Again, I just kind of addressed that with the last slide. Climate impact of motorized vehicles, reduction of traffic lanes has an environmental impact. Yes, it does. We recognize that. Share costs of road with suburban users. Make Ayd Mill Road a toll road. That's an interesting concept. Transfer ownership to MnDOT or Ramsey County. That's something I'm not sure the county or MnDOT would take Ayd Mill Road back from us, but it's currently a city road, and being as it's a city road, we're able to do what we would like to do to it. So that's the benefit of keeping it a city road. Only commuters driving through St. Paul use Ayd Mill Road. We know that's not true. You'll see that when Randy gets to his presentation. Concerns about Selby off-ramp and traffic at Selby and Snelling. We kind of talked about that with the bicyclists getting off on the north end at Selby. There really is no facilities for them up on the north end of Selby. Yep, and the Snelling-Selby intersection is pretty busy. We get that. We know that. We don't know necessarily that this proposal will impact that a great deal. We'll have to see where traffic might work its way out if we go down to one lane in the northbound direction. That might actually help the Snelling and Selby intersection. So we'll have to see how that works out. Connect the trail to the Minneapolis Midtown Greenway. Yep, that's the long-term vision for this trail. Again, we have to build our bike network in pieces. But the ultimate goal would be to connect it to the Minneapolis Midtown Greenway. Make this a transit corridor, light rail, trolley, bus. That's not part of these improvements, but it's certainly something we would and could consider in the future. Does this need to happen now? Yes, it does. I think we talked about this at the first presentation. Ayd Mill Road is in very bad shape. Something needs to be done to it now. We think this 3-lane proposal is a good approach to getting some improvements made out there. Concerns about construction impacts and closure of Ayd Mill during construction. Yep, our plan is to close Ayd Mill completely during the construction of whatever improvements we do out there. So that would probably be mid-July or early July through November. We would close the road totally to traffic. That might be a good thing, and that folks will then have to find an alternative route to get where they're going if they currently use Ayd Mill Road today. So some of those folks might find a different route, and once we reopen the roadway back up to traffic, they may not come back to Ayd Mill Road. We'll have to see how that all works out. Add trees and landscaping. Again, that's not part of this project, but that can all be done at a later date. And Ayd Mill Road is an important roadway during events that close other roads in the area. And again, as you will see, we did a little investigation about that, and Randy will go through Gameday traffic when he does his part of the presentation. So now I will turn it over to Randy to present the results of the traffic modeling and mitigation strategies for our proposed 3-lane configuration.
Thank you, Paul. I'm here. This is Randy Newton, the city's traffic engineer. I'm here to talk about the traffic modeling that we completed for Ayd Mill Road. The 4 basic components that we worked on were the traffic operations and the existing and proposed condition, the travel patterns and traffic diversion, the event traffic associated with Allianz Field, and lastly, our proposed mitigation strategies. The first slide here is our traffic operations, and before I get into the traffic operations, I do want to mention that our vehicle data was collected in 2019, in May and September of 2019. And secondly, as there are no pedestrian or bicycles currently using Ayd Mill Road, we had to estimate that usage, and we estimated that based on counts that were available to us on Shepherd Road in 2018. Looking at the northbound operations, I first point you to the northbound capacity line. This is an estimated capacity line for existing conditions. The second thing I point out is that in the AM, the volume graph of the AM peak hour shows that is under the capacity of the roadway. You can also see that in the PM peak hour that the volume of the roadway is under the existing capacity. That's also consistent throughout the day, where the volumes throughout the day are less than the northbound capacity of the roadway. In addition, all these traffic signals along Ayd Mill Road have acceptable capacity and work well throughout the day. We do note, however, that there is often congestion downstream of the Ayd Mill corridor or north of the Ayd Mill corridor in the Snelling Avenue that does create congestion in the area. Moving on, this graph is our existing operations for southbound. Again, this is our line for southbound capacity. This line is a little bit less than our northbound capacity due to the left turns and the impact of the left turn traffic has on the southbound capacity line. Again, you can see that our southbound volumes in both the AM and PM peak hours are less than our capacity. Again, we do note that there are some congestion that's experienced in the corridor. First, at times during the PM rush hour, there can be some backups experienced with traffic entering 35E. And like northbound, there are backups experienced in the Snelling corridor upstream of Ayd Mill Road. Moving on to proposed operations. First, I point that you can see that our northbound capacity line has now been decreased from our existing conditions, and that is due to the proposal where we're taking the 2 northbound lanes down to one lane of traffic. With that, you can see that we are expected to exceed the volumes. Demand is expected to exceed the northbound capacity of the roadway in the proposed condition. Primarily where this will be seen is on the southbound approach to St. Clair, and this is expected that it'll be primarily limited to the AM rush hour. Looking at PM, we approach our capacity of the roadway in the PM peak hour, but essentially we have the capacity to handle the traffic we expect to see in the PM peak hour. And again, the other parts of the day have lower volume than the graph shown here. So really the time frame that we expect to see some congestion northbound is limited to the AM peak hour. The next graphs look at our southbound traffic operations. And again, our southbound capacity line has been reduced from existing conditions. The primary reason for this is the addition of our pedestrians and bicycles and the crossings that they will make of the roadway. Every time a pedestrian or bicycle crosses the roadway, that takes away green time that would otherwise be utilized for that southbound traffic, and that is why we see that reduction delay. For the AM peak hour, our volumes stay substantially lower than our capacity. In the PM, the volumes that we see on the corridor approach the capacity line that we expect to have in the build condition. This next slide just sort of provides a summary of what those previous slides all mean in terms of expected traffic diversion. When we did this, we looked at this in 2 ways. The first was looking at the basically maintaining acceptable or reasonable operations on the corridor. This basically encompasses not having any significant delays or backups in the corridor, and that is the lower diversion number you see on this slide. The second one was to maintain existing travel times. So if it currently takes someone 2 minutes to get through the corridor in the northbound direction in the AM peak hour, the second number would basically maintain that 2-minute travel time and how much diversion is needed to maintain that travel time. In the AM rush hour, that kind of brackets our expected diversion between 20 and 25% of the northbound traffic during the AM peak hour, and that adds up to approximately up to 400 vehicles that we'd expect to divert in the northbound AM rush hour. Southbound, there really is no diversion needed to maintain acceptable operations, but a 15% diversion is needed if we want to maintain existing travel times, and that amounts to up to a 200 vehicle diversion in the PM peak hour or southbound. The next piece of our analysis was looking at our travel pattern data for Ayd Mill Road and where we'd expect diverted traffic to go. This analysis was based on data that was collected in 2018, and this is travel information data that was available to us. In addition, we utilized the Met Council's travel demand model as a tool to help us do this evaluation. And just kind of reiterate that based on the previous slides, we are primarily expecting diversion of northbound traffic in the AM rush hour and diversion of some southbound traffic in the PM rush hour. There may be some minor diversion throughout the other parts of the day, but we expect it to be pretty limited in scope. This first graphic shows the existing use of Ayd Mill Road, and a couple key takeaways from this slide. First is 75% of the trips utilizing Ayd Mill Road either have an origin or destination in St. Paul. Breaking that down a little bit farther, 50% of those trips have an origin or destination within 2 miles of Ayd Mill Road. And 10% of those trips have both an origin and destination within 2 miles of Ayd Mill Road. Lastly, 25% of the trips start and end outside of St. Paul. We would kind of associate this as being the regional traffic that is utilizing Ayd Mill Road. So this first graphic shows sort of our expected diversion patterns in the AM peak hour. As I shared before, we expect maybe up to 400 trips being diverted in the AM rush hour. The thick red line shows sort of the reduction in traffic on Ayd Mill Road associated with that diversion, and the green lines show where we expect that traffic to go. The thicker the green line, the bigger the volume. As you can see here, both Hamlin and Lexington are expected to see approximately 100 to 150 vehicle increase in the AM peak hour as a result of our proposed changes. We also note that we expect about 100 vehicles to divert completely outside of our study area. One route that they may take is Highway 55 through Minneapolis. In the PM, our volumes that we expected diversion on this for the PM are less, but the story is relatively the same as the previous slide. Our thick red line shows the reduction in traffic on Ayd Mill Road, and the green lines show the amount of diversion we expect on the surrounding roadways. Similar to Northbound, the primary corridors are Hamlin and Lexington. We also see Summit as a little bit higher volume on this slide. And due to the amount of trips, the diversion in the PM peak hour, these diversion routes are probably expected to see approximately 50 to 100 increase in traffic during the PM peak hour. Also, as with the AM, we expect about 50 trips that will be completely diverted outside of our study area. This next slide just summarizes the daily change in traffic volumes between our existing and proposed conditions. What you'll see here is very minor changes in the actual daily traffic diversion. And again, that is due to our expected diversion primarily occurring in the AM and PM rush hour and not throughout the day. The next piece of this is looking at our the game day conditions for an Allianz Field event and how that affects traffic on Ayd Mill Road. The first graphic here shows a weekday game, and both the green line shows the typical Wednesday track volumes, and the yellow line shows the volumes on when there was an Allianz Field game in 2019. I stop here for a second and just share that we were able to go back and collect, had data that was available from all the 2019 Allianz Field games, and that's what's utilized in these next graphics. In this one, in the Wednesday games, what we note is that in the Northbound, our PM peak volume is slightly higher and slightly later than a typical Wednesday. What that means for a game day is that on a Allianz Field weekday game day, we'd expect a little bit of diversion of traffic in the PM peak hour as vehicles are arriving or are going to an Allianz Field game. The second graphic is the departing graphic. So again, this is a Wednesday game, and again, the green line shows a typical Wednesday, and the yellow line shows a game day Wednesday. What you see is a later peak associated with the exit of Allianz Field event. That peak is not expected to exceed the southbound capacity of the roadway, so we would not expect any diversion of traffic. We also looked at the weekend games for Allianz Field from 2019, and with the weekend games, there were actually two different or various time frames that weekend games were held. We focused on the 3 o'clock games and the 7 o'clock games and graphed them separately. Again, the green line on this graph shows the typical weekend day, and then the blue line shows a 3 p.m. start, and the yellow line shows a 7 p.m. start. This graph is for northbound traffic. For a 3 p.m. start, we're starting to approach the capacity of Northbound, but we do believe we're below that our capacity of the roadway and would not expect any diversion. For a 7 p.m. game, we're well below the expected capacity of the northbound lanes. The next one shows the departure of both the 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. games. For the 3 p.m. game, because of the earlier departure time, we see the southbound volumes approaching the capacity of the roadway. So again, there might be a minor diversion of traffic associated with an earlier exit time on the weekend. The later 7 o'clock start is below the expected capacity of our southbound lanes. The last thing I'm here to share is sort of our traffic mitigation toolbox. As we shared in this presentation, we do anticipate some traffic diversion from Ayd Mill Road as a result of our proposed project. Primarily, we expect this to occur on Lexington and Hamlin, and these are primarily expected to occur in the AM and PM rush hours, not throughout the day. Our plan at this point is to monitor these roadways, and if appropriate, we would move forward with potential mitigation strategies if appropriate. Those mitigation strategies include traffic signal retiming, change lane configurations at an intersection. So this might be changing a left turn lane to a right turn lane, just using that space differently. We could look at restricting turn movements at intersections during peak periods. We could also look at removing parking or doing time of day parking restrictions to allow additional capacity at an intersection. We could look at traffic control changes such as changing the traffic signal phasing or adding left turn phases at a traffic signal. We will continue to look at increasing our multimodal options in the area as another option to reduce the demand on the corridor. And lastly, if necessary, we can look at additional speed enforcement. And then the last slide we have for you today is just sort of our next steps. So first, I just want to clarify that the Public Works proposal is to move forward with the 3-lane concept that's been shared during this presentation, with a multi-use trail being constructed along the east side of Ayd Mill Road. Additional information following this presentation will be provided this week and made available on the project website. We are planning to go to the City Council meeting on April 22nd for approval of the plan and budget for Ayd Mill Road. And lastly, our project timeline is that we expect to go out for bids in early June. We expect construction to start in August, and with construction, we expect a full closure of the road. That road will, that closure, the road will be closed from August into late fall of 2020. With that, thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to your comments and feedback.